go.
Big picture, and this is April 16th.
Oh, well, welcome everyone. I want to just start today with just a quick thing that I felt the Lord wants me to share generally with everyone, really, not just this group, but anyone. And we've been led to think about how to do the journey in the last couple of weeks, and we're seeing how critical that is to do how we do the journey, even more than content of what's in heaven, as it affects so many things, and also your ability to keep going and take on more and more responsibility and the bigger picture. And one thing that I was shown to me was, for those who are actually really embracing heaven, there's the one thing is not to get too to take on too many encounters at the expense of personal journey, and also absorbing a lot of the concepts that are needed to fully go on with the encounters. And I can see, I think it's a temptation we all feel, because we get such a beautiful experience, encounters, but it can actually affect the nature of the encounter, because what we're seeing is what comes out of as a joint mandate for the encounters is a combination not only of what's on your scroll, but also a combination of what you personally have opened yourself up to and experienced personally, and have even had the desire to ask questions about. I can see that's what comes out of encounters. So if you don't look into certain areas, those things may not come out as a mandate in encounters. So it's always the question of balance, and I've seen that a lot. It's how do you find that narrow path of that balance of all things that keeps that beautiful centering, really, of and nothing getting too excessive, and then it allows you to keep moving forward, instead of really going around maybe doing the same thing over and over, but a different version of the same age or type of encounter. Anyway, that's all I want to say today. I wanted to start, we're going to do the realms today, and Thomas has offered to give us a brief explanation, and then we'll open up questions to any form of understanding around all the different realms in eternity. But I realized with the journey that we hadn't talked a lot about being descending New Jerusalem, and I think virtually all of you are past that, but I wanted just to, for the sake as well of anyone listening, and also to help you pass on to others your understanding of how did you get to be a descending New Jerusalem. So I wonder if anyone just had a few minute testimony of, can they recall that what was the build up that enabled you to see yourself as a descending New Jerusalem, as opposed to just being entering or even possessing New Jerusalem, but actually governing in a descending way? What do you think contributed to that happening for you?
Jane, for me, it was simple. I heard your testimony and I stepped into it and started doing it.
Anyone else?
I'm sorry?
Anyone else?
Okay.
Because I think the answer to this is quite critical. think about the mandates and what you were doing in terms of the size of the mandates and the type of mandates. And did that change? And how did you see those mandates?
I actually saw, well, I was given a mandate, several mandates by the Lord, and hopefully this is the correct understanding, but the mandates I was giving actually seemed to be a lower age, so I had to come back down, descend back down and take care of the mandate that the Lord had me to do, and then and also for the entire ecclesia. Is that the type of answer you're looking for, or?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you felt you needed to descend to govern at the lower realms.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, that is the kind of answer. Yeah, and there's another answer I think as well, but that's really good.
Also, maybe distinguishing the mandates you get as to whether these are individually for you to descend and carry out on, or whether they are to be with others as a corporate mandate, group mandates, like we have been seeing and doing.
Yeah, so do you mean group as in going in with a group, or group as in just the whole ecclesia?
Well, for me personally, it's been different ways. There have been times where, and I don't want to word it that big mandates have to be done in a large group, but I have done that. But I've also done big mandates in a very small group.
I'm just thinking about the difference between a very big, what you do individually on your own. I'm thinking of that here at this context, and the transition between smaller mandates, which might be, say, for a nation, compared to a mandate for the whole world.
Well, you do those on your own too, don't you? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. But I'm saying I think that's one of the keys to the transition, because what it happens is, well, in my experience, what happened was you actually begin to see yourself over the earth, rather than, say, hovering over a nation. So I think, yeah, that's when you really, I think, take on the full measure of the capacity of the descending New Jerusalem.
I saw it from the thrones I was sitting on.
Wow.
Because I've always done, like in the old wineskin, intercessory prayer was always for over the whole earth. So for me, what has changed in my own personal journey was the heavenly realms, and knowing where I was governing from in those thrones and now, of course, cities of New Jerusalem, to descend down with those.
Yeah. So did anyone have that kind of experience I've described of you kind of you I almost sort of felt like you're going into space, and and that way you could hold the whole world in your heart, but versus sort of seeing anything in terms of you being in the earth.
I do remember that, Jane. I remember thinking in terms that it felt to me like a re-entering space capsule with the heat shield down as I descended down. So yeah, I had that sense of coming down out of space over the earth.
Yes, because at that point I wasn't descending through the realms. because this was before I entered eternity and I knew anything about that. All I knew was you took your throne in Jerusalem, and then I was inviting the tribes in, and then I started to think, well, how do I govern over big picture mandates? And that just instantly, the only way I could see how to do it was I had to see the whole earth. And it's almost like I wanted to hold the whole earth in my heart. It's like I was a massive, massive, sort of giant figure that could put its arms around the earth. And I remember that very clearly. That transition for me was massive, because I then got a huge sense of the magnitude of the mandates we were called to.
Oh, sorry.
No, go on. It's really good to know different people's experiences, because I think if we can get some, we might need to share different ways, if it happens to different ways for different people as well.
Yes, I felt, I experienced something similar. What happened is I had this mandate and I didn't know how to handle it. So at that time I knew about New Jerusalem. So I went into New Jerusalem, and as I was engaging the Lord about it, I became a huge guy, very big, about 10 feet, bigger. And then as I was walking, I saw that the globe, the whole earth as a globe, came on my shoulders. And with one hand, I was carrying it, and I was walking. Then after a while, I started running with it. And then people started running and coming to it. And as they were coming, scrolls were falling onto them.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's really good. So the earth was on your shoulders. Just trying to get a picture of that. So, like you almost carrying the earth.
Yeah, on the shoulders with just one arm, and the other hand was swinging, and I was walking, and I started running.
Wow.
Yeah, but when I got to the end of the route, I realized that I wasn't even on the edge. As I was running, I was like, my feet was off the ground, and all the people who were running towards me, it was like I was in the I had been combined and mingled with the Godhead. Like, it's not just me. I knew it wasn't me. And the crowd were moving towards us. And so they were all also hanging up in the air. And the scrolls were falling to them. But as I got close to the end of the route, I saw two big hands in front of us. And in their hands was a ball of fire. A ball of fire rolling in the hand. That is when we all stopped.
Wow, it seems like there's some similarity but differences in terms of how people transition from a smaller mandate to a whole ecclesia, the whole world mandate. Very interesting. Anyone else?
Yes, for me, before I descended down to a new earth was on a dance floor. I was communing with the Lord Jesus, and when we were interacting, all of a sudden I recognized I was pregnant with the earth inside of me. And after that ascension, there will be a sort of like a tunnel, or there will be a pathway, invitation for me to descend down to the new earth.
Wow. Oh, that is really different as well. Well, thank you, everyone. So what I'm seeing is then that's really, would you agree that's the age of new beginnings? So we're operating then as a descending New Jerusalem, in the age of new beginnings, before we've entered eternity, we don't really know anything about eternity, infinity at that point, but we're growing in our ability to cope with big mandates, and our heart for smaller ones is fading as we see we can do more and more big picture stuff.
When I teach with Jean from time to time, and last year I love to have a whiteboard in front of me or beside me, and I just started drawing 2 globes on it, and I would draw the first globe and call that Earth, and I would draw the second globe and call it Heaven, and they were overlapped. And I would explain to people that Heaven is moving in the direction of Earth, and the point of intersection is where we want to be. And from there, I would teach something.
I really like that. I think that's simple but really profound. Yeah. So would other people call that the age of new beginnings? Or if not, how would you define the age of new beginnings?
I would call that age of new beginnings.
Yes, I in my notes I've got next to new beginnings I've got new temple, new heaven, new earth. I don't remember where I got that. One of the meetings. It made sense to me anyway. And at the time the Lord had said to me, your temple's built. I don't want you to, you've done enough with that. I want you to move on. And so when I began to hear more about this place called New Jerusalem, I thought, well, that's where I must be. If my temple is built, that's where I must be.
So why do you think it's called the age of new beginnings? What is a new beginning?
I see it at the point at which sonship starts kicking in. And I also see it as the point at which we begin to do creating as a son as opposed to just ruling. On Mount Zion we rule, but when we get to New Jerusalem, we are starting to create as well as rule.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't see it like that. But anyway, just anyone else got any other aspects of what is new? What does new beginnings mean?
I take a second shot at it, Jane. We're talking here about new heaven and new earth. Revelation 21, the beginning of the chapter there.
I mean, definitely mature sonship. At that point, you really are moving into very mature sonship. But what else is in the scriptures that comes out really strongly that is a new beginning?
Is that the final overcoming? Is that the 8th overcoming?
There
Well, I'm thinking
new order.
Just those 2 passages, 21 and 22.
Oh, okay.
Would it be called as a new beginning because there is a new order? Like
Yeah. So what's the new order?
Even the how, like we are under the right now solar systems and so on won't be like that, and like almost like there will be a different set of laws that will govern that age. Well, I haven't figured it out fully yet.
Yes, no, that's it. That's really good. Yeah, so what sort of examples of new laws are there in the scriptures?
I don't know if anybody said it already, but it's it's a mention that there won't be a need for the sea, that the sea will be no more.
Mm. Yeah, actually, just quickly on that, I saw another explanation of the sea as meaning evil the other day. So that was actually a written thing, in a Bible. It wasn't my revelation, but that's what they said it meant. Yeah, anything else?
Not only we have glorified bodies, but it will be spiritual dimensions will be seen to those who are not even like us. And it's almost also the people who are outside of New Jerusalem. And I wonder if they're going to be trapped in different dimensions.
Oh, I don't know about that. I don't know. I'm just thinking more about what it really lists in Revelation 21 and 22, because those are really key ways. It's a change of a law of how you're operating.
You're thinking no more death, no more sorrow, no more crying, no more pain.
Yeah.
Former things have passed away, along with the old heaven and the old earth.
Yes, yeah, exactly, because it's perfection. You're then operating when you're in that well, it's more than a mindset. I don't know what you call it. What word we use? Position in the heavenlies. You're in a perfection position. Everything is perfect, and that's my understanding. Just from my own personal revelation, not that I've heard anyone else say this, is that is why it's new beginnings, because you're beginning out of a state that was always how we were intended to operate, and also in a state which I do believe Jesus operated out of when he was on the earth, and that was why he could do miracles, not be affected by outside environment, and could operate in a completely supernatural way that the average man couldn't, who didn't know how to be in that realm. Does that resonate with everyone, or?
It does, and I think it's also that Hebrew mindset where an end is always a beginning, and 8 is always new beginnings. And I believe, if I'm counting my ages correctly, new beginnings is the 8th age.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, the end of the beginning meeting. Yeah, getting back to really the realm that we were initially intended to operate out of before things went wrong.
So we're still talking about new beginnings, right? We're not talking about New Jerusalem yet, are we?
Well, we're saying New Jerusalem. When you begin to be the descending New Jerusalem, you're operating in the age of new beginnings, which is different from operating out of eternity, descending through the realms. So I'm trying to get the distinction so that you can see it for yourself and also father others into that. Because the transition, I see, is quite crucial, because it's very hard if all you've done is, say, been in the courts or ruling on your mountain, to suddenly, or even have entered New Jerusalem and done nothing more, to then go into eternity and somehow it to be okay and your spirit not to fight it. Because I see what's important is you've got to understand that that's the basis in which you're operating out of, and that's okay with you, because you see that as the supernatural way in which most of the scriptures were written. Can you see what I'm saying? Because if you can't see that, then you're going to say, well, why is everything perfect? Everything isn't perfect in my life. What am I doing? This is silly. So you've got to understand, why do you have that ability to, as a spirit being, to enter into that age of new beginnings? And other people will say to you, well, everything isn't perfect. Why is it? What would you say if everyone said that?
Because we call a thing to be, what is it? We call a thing to be as though it's not.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah,
Declaring a thing from the beginning.
yeah, that's very good. Anyone else?
I would say it's where we're going. And in order to get to go where you're going, you need to begin to operate. That's why I like the word, I think the word imputed. Because we're operating as if we're there, because we know we're going there. We will be there at one point full time.
That's good. Good, Thomas. Yeah.
Well, first we have to create everything that exists. First exists in the spirit, and then it manifests in the natural. So, my understanding was that we're learning as sons to create like the Father creates, and which causes things to eventually manifest in I guess what we call the natural. And it wouldn't have been like, we wouldn't have to do this if the fall didn't happen. So we're having to basically learn how to create in the spirit and operate in the spirit. And because a lot of spirits don't even know that the spirit exists, if you will. I mean, that there's a spiritual realm, and that's because of the fall. So us being able to create and understand that there's even a spiritual realm where we create is a process of us overcoming. I mean, it's part of the process of overcoming.
That's very good. So when you say create, what sort of things would you create in the age of new beginnings?
I would create mindsets.
It's also a place where we began creating heavenly cities for the first time as a form of legislating.
I was wondering if this may be a far out question, but I'll just put it out there because, I mean, it's purely because I want to know, or I just want to understand. Do we work the timeline to bring about new beginnings?
Anyone like to have a go at answering that?
I suppose, and I've never thought of this before, and it's a really good question. that we are operating in forerunning timeline when we talk about a new beginning. And that's why it can be something that's begun in one timeline but hasn't even begun to begin in another timeline. So you're going in forerunning on your own. The first one in, you've got the beginning there for just one person and nobody else at that point. And it's not gotten to the place where the whole ecclesia by any means is operating in that at all.
I see what you mean. That's really good. I've really seen it like that before, but that's very good.
Because we didn't see that whole concept until later on, but I can now see where it applies backwards too to these previous situations. But Thomas's point is well said too, that positionally you are in something because it's been imputed to you, but you may not have fully stepped into the fullness of it. And that's, again, why it's a beginning. It's not a completion, it's a beginning.
Yes, yeah. And you definitely, when your spirit accepts to operate in the age of new beginnings, you can feel this metamorphosis going on in your mind, that everything you now say, I don't tolerate this, I don't tolerate that, because this is my new premise of how life should be. So I probably would say, I would say you're creating mindsets. I think it's very, very good, that.
And Jane, I'm thinking this is the point we start untethering from the old mindset, even though we're not aware of it.
Yeah.
And then tethering to the new mindset.
Yeah. That's a huge part, isn't it? When you really see the importance of tethering and untethering.
Especially with reference to the nature of the ecclesia.
Yeah.
I think the dreams enter in, and what everybody's talking about, dreams enter into this. Where the Lord's leading us into a new mindset.
And what I saw just a few days ago was the scripture that says that be transformed by the renewal of your mind. The word transform is also the same word translated transfigurated in Matthew. So be ye transfigured by the changing of your mind. Huge. So if we can change our mind, we can be transfigured.
Would you agree Jesus was operating out of this age when he came to the earth?
I would, because it was totally, even though it was prophesied scripturally, it was totally outside of what the, I guess, cultural experience had been at that time.
That would explain all the miracles having to do with no sorrow, no sickness, no death. And it would require him to have actually died and be resurrected and ascended and so on to be able to operate out of that. That's very perceptive, actually.
Because to me, it really seems to help explain why we have a right to do this. Because I know so many struggle, and I've been asking, how can we explain this, that this is a right? And that came to me that if we saw Jesus operating in that age, just it's never been called that, then it takes away any discontentment with the concept, because most people don't have any problem with accepting the miracles that Jesus did. It's just that we're calling it a different thing now, and we're trying to almost explain how did he get to that point.
I would even say that today, when we're trying to explain to people, why are we bothering to do heavenly realms? and we're doing new beginning. It's another new beginning. And for me, because I like the process of the feast, to me, it's the new beginning is the new age known as the Tabernacles age. And when Jesus, he was preparing people to move into the Pentecostal age, and we're doing heavenly work, and we're beginning to prepare people ourselves to move into the Tabernacles age.
The Word became flesh and dwelt among us.
Mm-hmm.
He tabernacled amongst us. I definitely see it now, Jane. Revelation 1, 2, and 3, we're seeing about overcoming in chapters 2 and 3. And we see that Jesus overcame in the desert, and then he came out of the desert in the power of the Spirit and began his work. So that's the equivalent of having overcome in chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation. And you look at Revelation, it actually has a bookend on both ends. The 1 through 3 is one bookend, and 21 and 22 with New Jerusalem as the other bookend. So really, you could almost collapse it all and say that we overcome just like Jesus did in chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation, just like he did in the wilderness. And then we move into New Jerusalem in a certain sense. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. Yeah, and just back to what you were saying about the cities, legislating for the cities. That I thought we did more in Infinity than we did at this stage. Are you thinking of anything else that I'm not recalling we did at this stage?
Did you wait to create heavenly cities for the purpose of legislating until you entered into Zion? And eternity?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask you a
I
question?
don't think that revelation came to me at all at this stage. All it was really governing as a descending New Jerusalem, and for myself living out of this perfection and asking what was the age of perfection. Oh yes, I did have a bit of a transition before I got to the age of new beginnings. It was the realm of perfection. I began asking, what is the realm of perfection? And that opened it up for me. And then I had a few encounters where I was just in a completely perfect environment, and it was so beautiful for me. I think it just gave me that hunger to see that I could live out of that environment.
Where is the realm of perfection?
Well, I saw it as really, it was just under eternity. So you've got heaven, heaven of heavens, and then the realm of perfection, and before eternity. So it's sort of, what did I say in that diagram? What was there? I mean, I just ended up had this encounter. Oh, you were there, Bill. Do you remember we went in this light chamber? We were asking what was the realm of perfection for healing. And we were in this light chamber, and it was one of the most beautiful encounters I had. And then we just saw, everything was just light. And I began to really get a grasp of there could be a place where it's all perfect. So it probably is the realm of you probably could say the realm of perfection is in the age of new beginnings.
This is so helpful because I'm realizing that I really had not fully understand where I was during that period of time. So it's getting clearer just in this discussion.
Oh,
thank you.
Good. Yeah. Well, I felt I had to bring this out because it's one, to make sure everyone has been through that transition, and if anyone hasn't, hopefully it will open doors for them to be in there. But secondly, to father others, it's really a crucial transition I saw. And I saw that there was a whole lot of people who couldn't make that transition to see why should it be New Jerusalem. And then there were a whole load of people that could, but went straight to eternity But then a lot of the time they just the main thing they talked about was releasing a frequency. So it was like I could see there was this vacuum of lack of understanding of this age of new beginnings that was crucial. So yeah, I mean, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I don't think we're dealing with cities at this age, other than all we've done is experience New Jerusalem.
I think you're right, Jane. I was in a bit of a fog at that point and didn't really know where I was.
Well, I
I mean,
kind of,
yeah. I suppose because at that point you're not even thinking of other cities, are you? Or you don't even know what they are. I mean, maybe say you have heard of a name. Would you at that point be creating it? Well, no. You're not creating cities as in those names. What you're doing with the cities is you're creating an example of the heavenly blueprint that you have seen. So, for example, like, everything you knew about the new wineskin, you might create a city for that new wineskin. But I don't think you could do that as a descending New Jerusalem, do you?
I kind of thought of creating cities as a city would be a mindset in and of itself.
Yes. It's another way of describing it. A mindset or a new blueprint. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it can be multiple things. Yeah. I want to do a whole thing on cities and working in infinity as part of this group. So if you're unclear on cities, we will cover that.
But Jane, I am seeing that what came out of this is when you want to help somebody by encounter to understand the realm of perfection, that heavenly light chamber encounter is perfect for them to have their first experience of what perfection is.
Yeah.
I mean, you can talk about it, but take them there and experience it. Oh, I get it. This is great.
Yeah, and to really feel the light. I just remember just getting a real concept of overwhelming light, which you hadn't experienced being in the courts and that kind of environment. It was, and it just gave me a huge hunger for not accepting less in terms of health or anything, death. I mean, I think it was a door opener for me saying, well, I'm not going to tolerate death anymore, whereas before I was quite happy to tolerate death. So, yeah, it was huge for me. So, let's move on then to, if everyone's happy, or unless you've got any more questions on the Age of New Beginnings or being a descending New Jerusalem, let's move on to the realms in eternity. Everybody okay to do that?
I am.
Yeah. Oh, good. So let's. So Thomas, are you happy to give us a little explanation of how you see the realms in eternity?
The realms in eternity.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was thinking, you mean like City of Everlasting? That
Yeah.
perspective?
Yeah.
I thought I was just going to describe each level.
Oh, each level of what?
From Age of Enlightenment all the way up to
I
Age of
see.
Lion.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, I was going to I was going to focus today on the eternity.
All right.
But maybe just explain in your own experience, what different realms have you seen in eternity?
Well, I recently became aware that an experience I had last year is what brought me into the realm of eternity, and I didn't know that. And what it was before being involved with heavenly realms and all, I I was looking to find a way to get at the tree of life. And I remembered as a child that being told about the angels, the big angels, and the fiery sword protecting it. And so there was no way I could get through there at the time. And then so when I went to Father about that, he says, you can go through there. So I said, wow, okay. And in my private time with him, I said, okay. I backed up and I ran as fast as I could, and I dove into the fiery sword. While I'm doing that, I'm thinking, I may die right now. But what happened was I dove right through the sword and came out the other side. And of course, when I'm in the spiritual realm, I'm very gymnastic. And I ended up right by the tree of life. And so as I was reading some other material, that was my entry into eternity. And I did not know that. I didn't conceive of it at that time. So at this point, that's my understanding of eternity. I'm with Father over there, and he's continuing to show me various things.
Have you been into everlasting?
I don't know. I really don't know what it means.
Right, okay. What about doing any sort of benching with the Godhead in eternity, like through a portal? Have you done anything like that?
Again, because I don't use the language very often, I'm still learning it. You said something about the prophetic recently that I read, and it made me remember about being on prophetic teams. We were usually teams of 2 or 3, and then it dawned on me, wait a minute, threes is a bench. And when we ministered to people, we were going to heaven to the Lord and say, what do you want me to tell this person? What do you want them to know? And so I kind of made the connection as prophetically we were operating as a bench at that time. And the aspect of time and timeline, etc. I had an experience with John Paul years ago, and I had just spent an entire week, and all we were doing 12, 14 hours a day is studying dreams, how to interpret dreams, etc. And at the end of the whole process, John Paul told one of his experiences, and it was about being taken back to the time of David, and he actually got to meet King David, and what it was all about, and where it was, and as John is telling all the details of this story, I mean, I was there. I could smell the camels and the mules and all that, and I was just totally there. And so after we were all done, and John had some time, I went over to him and I said, I just described to him what happened to me, and I was thinking, oh, it must happen to everybody. And he gave me one of those looks that he likes to give to people at that time. He said, don't ever let that skill go. And so when I look back at that now, I didn't know what it was then. I learned how to go back in the timeline. And go ahead.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So I don't know how that fits into eternity and everlasting, but anyway.
I'm not sure on that, but does anybody, did anybody say what was their first experience in eternity? I mean, in terms of just the governing aspect, not what the encounter was, but what setup were you in terms of governing from eternity?
Well, I experienced the bench of three. As being over the elevator shaft, over that, and flowing out of there. I think that was one of my first senses on that. And again, that came out of something you described that I stepped into.
What do you? Well, I want to ask you: has anyone else seen that? And how do you see it? What does it look like?
The bench of three or the shaft or
The bench of three, yeah, with you and the Godhead.
Functionally, I pour out from the bench of three.
Does anybody else?
With a bench of three, we then become the bench of four, right?
Yes, yeah.
That is the time we become a window.
Yeah.
And it's poured through us. We pour through us things on the earth.
What does it look like to you?
We create a portal.
So are you like standing on the one of the corners of a square?
Yes, I'm at one point, and one of the Godhead, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, are at the other point to make a four.
Yeah, yeah. And are you just kind of like leaning into that hole and like mandating angels to pour through that hole?
Yes, you pour the blessings as water upon the earth or upon the people you have a mandate over.
Yeah, yeah. That's how I see it. But if anyone else has another experience,
Jane,
I did wonder if it came through you as a person as opposed to going through the hole.
And you get to this is the point, you may get to the tipping point, you know. You get to the tipping point and then you pour it over. You feel that you are full.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yes, you fill up from the river of life like a water bucket, and then you really everything in spirit wants to pour that out.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so crucial to begin to get that flow from the river of life and benching and arcing as a tree, because you so then want to govern over these mandates. It's like everything in you is like, I can't just sit back. You're hearing mandates all the time, and you really want to deal with them in this profound way.
Jane, we've also had encounters, I believe, where we've been pulling people up into this spot by reaching over and grabbing them and pulling them up. I can remember having periods of time that doing that repeatedly with folks, pulling them up. I think that's also from the same place, if I understand correctly.
Yes, I recall that being more when we discovered the bench of one.
Okay.
We saw this upward flow, and then we saw this descending governing flow.
Okay.
And the two were like, you could choose either or both. But I don't recall it being at this point when we first discovered this portal, because we saw that there was the four sets of angels as well on the edge. And I think at that point we were just getting used to being the water bearer and pouring out. So it could either be water or it could be light, or what other things that people pour out?
Fire.
Fire, yeah.
We've been mixing things over the door.
Oh.
It looks like a bomber door, and there's a mandate and we mix the things together. It's put into a hopper, and then our scepter looks like the release lever. We push it forward, the doors open, and then it's released out, and it sprays over as we travel.
Wow.
And it's actually a double door, Jane. There's a door above that we open to let the flow in to do the mixing of this, that, and everything else. And then when the time comes, there's a door below that we open to release the mixture.
So when you say mixed, do you mean like it could be, say, water and fire?
Yeah.
And light and various things together, and it swirls together and mixes, and when it's ready, the hopper opens. Or we open it.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and the combination of what specifically is being mixed is by mandate as to what's meant to be included.
Yeah.
And there's a viewfinder that we target in while the mixing's going on, and then when we're over the site, then it's time to release it.
And has anyone seen lightning bolts being released?
I do that regularly.
Ah.
Lightning bolts.
I've heard quite a few getting lightning bolts, and it's in scripture. I think it might be that Revelation 3, is it? Oh no, maybe that's the pillar one.
There's the voice of the Lord.
Yeah, it talks about that.
Is this what you're doing in eternity?
Yes. So this is like the lowest portal, I see. If you can almost see it like these different realms stacked on top of each other.
Uh-huh.
And if you can get like the order has relevance because it's a growing level of understanding of your authority.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the first one when you realize that you're well able to bench with the Godhead and be a water bearer, and the mandating the angels through this portal. And then you see the next realm, which we're calling beginning realm, which represents the bench of one, of when everything was one in the original state. And that, well, does anyone want to explain what a bench of one feels like to them?
Everything's there. I mean, not just the Godhead and us, but all the men in white linen, the great cloud of witnesses, the angels, all of creation is there, all in one place in one. Mm-hmm. Lady Wisdom and so on.
What does it feel like to you, Bill, in terms of experiential feeling? What does it?
It's like you don't look over and see anybody anymore because everybody's in you and you're in them. On the bench of 3, which becomes 4, when we're there, I can look around and see Father, Jesus, and Holy Spirit individually there in that place with me. But in the bench of 1, it's like if you were to look over, there's nobody there.
Thank you for describing that, Bill. I've been wondering about that. If I look outward, I'm looking through a set of eyes and I see things ahead, but I don't see anyone. If I turn around and look behind me, say if you were looking into your mind, I see lots of people and things there. But when I turn around, they're all behind me and I'm looking out of the eyes, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a different experience because it's like you're not consulting with Lady Wisdom because she's part of you.
Yes. She's in your mind as the conversations of others going on, but it's like you're looking out of the eyes of, anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Has anyone, the beginning of this, I found for me was when you began to entangle with wisdom and the seven spirits and the handmaidens all together. Is that common for most people? They've done that? Because I found that helped me grasp the concept.
Yes, me too. That's how it started.
What did it look like when you were doing all that?
That's the time I experienced like I'm a vacuum cleaner. You know, I was engaging with Lady Wisdom and her handmaidens, and then with the seven spirit of the Lord. And then like a vacuum cleaner, I was sucking everything into me. And I realized it wasn't just me, and we became one.
I remember the activation we did at the time now, Jane. This is really good because it's bringing back a lot of experience that I'd forgotten. We did an activation on the dance floor where I could picture us going up and swirling around and getting closer and closer until it no longer was a dance, but it was a unity now that happened as we went up. It was like a reverse funnel cloud for a tornado. It was large at the bottom and got small at the top and became one.
I remember that, Bill.
Yeah, we had that activation. I remember that now. This is helpful because it's going to be so helpful for us to be able to father others. I'd forgotten so many of these intermediate steps, transitional steps along the way, and some of them I didn't know where they were, and now I do know where they were. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think this is why I wrote this page that that's been put on the group. It took me ages to write this page, so I really love it if you really took time to try and absorb this, because I felt I had to get this clear. What was happening? Where were we when we were in heaven? Where were we in the kingdom of heaven? Where were we in the kingdom of God? And I was like, I've got to get a handle on this. And this was, at the time, this was my best attempt. I don't know if I'd change a few things now, but I don't know. I'll have to go through the page. But at any rate, I think it really helped me because once I could understand all these realms, I could understand the progression of myself, and then I can still see. And the reason why I can remember them all so well is because I still operate through all these now. Because what I'm doing is I like if I'm say pouring forth from everlasting now, I see it going through these other realms, and I see it very clearly, and so that's why it's become very solid in my spirit. And the thing that did it for me was seeing it as the strands of DNA. I don't know if anyone else sees that, but all the time, that's all I see. I'm just a strand of DNA, and everything else is a strand of DNA, and we're all entangling. You know, in those pictures you see of the DNA strands twirling round. Or you could say like a rope, and you've got like 3 sort of strands or however many strands, multiple strands, and you're all wrapping around each other. That's what I see all the time, but particularly the bench of one. And so I can't identify anything, you know, can't identify wisdom, the men in white linen. All I see is I'm this intense twirling, entangling DNA strand that can move. So I can move down to govern, or I can move up to pull people up the realms. And it was quite critical for me to get this revelation, because it's affected everything else, how I function. And this is now how I function out of Metatron's cube. So I know it's a really important. It's almost, wow, just had this revelation. It's almost like you could see it like a body. It's a form of a body. It's a sort of you see yourself just as this strand, which Actually, I think is what it is you're not an individual strand, it's the three strands of man. You're the three strands of man, and you're entangling with the three strands of the Father, and then the three strands of Holy Spirit, three strands of Jesus, and then other men's three strands, and of which wisdom is part of the Father. So people say, well, why wisdom? Because it's all part of the strands of the Father. So that's why everything has to, in the end, bench with everything else and become the bench of one, because that's the original blueprint. Everything was entangled in everything else, and eventually there's no separation. Does that help? Can you envisage that? If anyone's not seen that before, can you see it?
Yes.
Oh, Lord.
The eyes I was talking about looking out, it felt strange to say, but it was like a giant head or brain. And when you described Metatron's cube, that made a lot of sense.
Wow.
So, over to you, anyway. Any questions? Any on anything in eternity, or wherever you're at? Just ask wherever you're at.
I was just thinking, Jane. When we open the everlasting doors upon ourselves and then upon everybody else, that's an example of operating in the eternity. In eternity, that's what I was thinking, because we use the everlasting doors a lot.
Tell me what everlasting doors are.
Actually, I just on that. I'm glad you brought it up, Simone, because I have actually been asking where are the everlasting doors in the last week, and I realised I hadn't got any concept of where I was when I was opening them.
Okay, I was just thinking the same thing, because it's kind of. I remember opening them all over.
Yeah, but I think where we are. I don't think we're actually in eternity, but it might be as well, because it's all linked and it's all becomes one in the end. But specifically, the revelation I got was that we were in the Tabernacle of David, in the city of Zion, and we were dancing with David, releasing a frequency, and the doors are there.
Okay.
Because that's how I started. I mean, before I knew anything about eternity, infinity, all I knew was David's tent. And so for ages I was engaging David, and I was hearing these blueprints, and then I was opening these doors. Mm-hmm. And then it dawned on me that is what the city of Zion is, isn't it? Are you with David? That's my understanding.
This is interesting. I'm wondering if it's actually the area of transition between Zion and everlasting. Because it occurs to me that everlasting has to have to do with everlasting city somehow. I'm wondering if this glass ceiling that we broke in the last Wednesday Zoom to give access to the city everlasting is actually the location of everlasting doors between city everlasting and Zion. Just a thought.
Yeah.
And to answer Thomas's question, there's various doors that we've been aware that they're there, that we could open on ourselves and then open the other way to cause the thing that was being flowing onto us when we opened them, cause it to flow out on the earth in the other direction. Mm-hmm. And we're beginning, and there would be a door for this and a door for that and a door for another thing. And now we're beginning to realize that they probably all have one location. But up until then, we were encountering them individually, kind of haphazardly, I think, weren't we? You'd happen to run to this one or that one, and
Yeah, we didn't really know where we were originally when we saw them.
yeah, it's like you bumped into them.
Yes, yeah. But I realised, have we not done a section on everlasting doors?
There is a page out there.
Yeah, I don't think we didn't cover it. Is that right? You haven't covered it, Bill, in your other.
Just to, at some point, we may have pointed the page out. I don't think we did in great detail.
Oh, well, it might be worth covering it at that point in the other group. But certainly go over the page. I think you'll get the concepts because I illustrated quite a few different doors in there. And as far as I know, most are quite comfortable with everlasting doors. So I don't see it to go over it in this group, but yeah, you can always ask for it in the other groups. So back to, where are we? What were we saying? Oh, the entangling. Oh yes. So if you can get. Oh no, I was opening to you for questions, wasn't I? Yeah. And even how you operate as a bench of one going up and down. How do you see that? That's an interesting. Where I see myself in very different forms then. But even the question is that's really important to ask is around, how do you enter eternity as well? How do you actually reside in eternity as opposed to just visit it? And I was sort of toying with whether that should be a topic or not. But the thing is, I think a lot of the experiences on how you do that are probably quite individual. And so to put some sort of protocol on it I'm sensing is not really a good thing. People could experience it in lots of different ways, but if you haven't asked that question of heaven, it's a really important question, because what you're talking about is moving the governance. You're then out of time and you're not under the governance of the earth. So there's a pull from the star houses that creates a governance over your life, and again contributes to death and all the decay. And what you're doing in eternity is you're saying, I'm coming out of that. So you're going above the star houses, and you're dominating and ruling and governing above the star houses instead of being subject to their pull. So you could almost try and see yourself in space and imagine, say, like 12, I see them almost as like 12 stepping stones. So a galaxy is a stepping stone. And I see these 12 star houses, and I see the star houses represent they show the full blueprint. That's what the star houses do as well. So they're not evil. They just have depending on where you're positioned with them, above or below, they have an influence. But they actually declare the majesty of the whole blueprint of what's happening through the Bible and right to the end times. And so they're very significant. If you don't understand the star houses, they're really worth asking and encountering them, because they're a huge element. And they're also linked with the realms. So yeah, they're important. So one thing you can do, which I know a number have found this, is you dance on top of the star houses, and this begins as a form of governing. This then helps you with the transition. So you're descending New Jerusalem, and and you saw this floating throne, and you haven't gone into eternity at that point, and then you can see the star houses above you, but they're still ruling and governing. So you go above the star houses as a spirit being, and then many find that naturally comes out. They dance on these like 12 stepping stones. That is just a beautiful form of governing. I mean, I loved it. In fact, I still do a version of it now. It was quite pivotal to me personally when I encountered this. And then you ask, how does the 12 star houses link with the 12 stones on the breastplate? Because what's happening is when you're in eternity, the full 12 stones on the breastplate are activated. So they finally become full and mature. Whereas in all the realms below that and all your encounters, you are actually going through this process of understanding these stones and almost getting them in place on your breastplate and beginning to become real in you of what they actually meant. And that's why the 12 cities, again, are all linked. They're all linked with the 12 stones on the breastplate. Everything's all linked. And once you see the link, you see why each thing is important to understand. Because I could never understand what difference does the 12 stones make on the breastplate. And then when I got into this and saw them activated with eternity, and now I can see it again with the cities, that the cities are leading you to each stone on the breastplate to really understand what that means. So you're understanding the full nature of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit and yourself. So you can ask, well, okay, if I'm above the star houses, what does that mean for my breastplate stones? And see what you find there. And then also we've got some pages around self-government and ego, and we're seeing that it's really the key essence of being in eternity is you releasing and coming out of self-government, self-ego, and self-works. And Bill's done 3 superb pages on those, and I think again you'll see the significance of the journey then of coming out of self-government, really. Does that help, or is it all still a bit out there to understand?
I think there's 2 ways of experiencing it. One is you know what the journey is and you go through them one at a time, knowing what's up ahead. And the other way to experience the journey is you don't know what's ahead, but you come to it and then you instinctively know what to do when you get there. And both ways will work very well. I mean, Thomas didn't have all the details on what to do with the flaming sword, but he bull rushed the flaming sword, and there he was, right?
Yeah.
And so that was encounter without necessarily understanding, but you just knew what the mandate, you knew what to do because you just knew. And that works too. That works. And you find out what it meant afterwards, or you can know what it means and you go through them one at a time of other people's testimonies and you're allowed to step through them. I've stepped through Jane's testimonies many times in different stages of the journey.
But you know, Bill, a lot of this came from our Wednesday Zooms.
Yes, they did.
Yeah, this isn't my revelation. This is the journey we were led on through the Wednesday Zooms. Week after week, we were shown every single step. I don't think I would have ever got to this point of understanding without that group.
Yes.
And I think that's what's the magnificence of a bench of 12 is that it can lead you on this journey that it is unbelievably profound.
That's a good point. Yes, week after week we did these things. I remember dancing on the star house as part of the Wednesday Zoom. But the actual revelation of how to do the some of the functions in eternity came at a point that you shared a sentence here and there to click for me. It just was the right piece of information at the right time, and I stepped through it. But you're right, systematically, we did go through this process week after week after week, and you are absolutely correct, too, that being part of a fully functioning bench of 12, that bench of 12 will build the whole group up into the fullness. Step by step by step, week after week after week. That will happen.
Yeah, yeah.
Even if you don't know the journey ahead, the group will just do the journey one step at a time as a group, and the revelation comes and you do it together.
Yeah, and that's why it was such a fast pace as well. And I think that's why you've got to keep applying it personally. Because if you just allow the encounter and then you forget what happened in the encounter and you're not doing anything on your own, it's not consolidated. And then it becomes very like sort of like a flimsy structure, you know, like a sort of a cube made out of cotton that's just not strong. And I think that's why it's got to come with these, you increasingly desiring and asking for mandates. And then the moment you ask for a mandate, you have to ask, well, how do I govern over that? Whereabouts, what way, what realm? And then it really consolidates how you operate.
That's interesting. That's the difference between a series of activations and a flow of revelation resulting in experience on a bench of 12.
See, another question that's coming to me is, why is eternity so important? Why don't we just stay in the other realms? If someone asked you that, what would you say?
I see it as if you operate in time instead of eternity, what you create in time will expire because of the limitation of time. But what you create in eternity will perpetuate, and that's where God creates, and the goal is to be like Him. So we need to create where He's creating.
Ooh, that is good. I love it.
Yes, Simone.
And that's a pretty awesome reason, isn't it, to why go into eternity and not stay in the other realms. That's really good. Any other reasons?
My reason would be, I'm looking for the shortcuts. I'm looking for, only because of the way my life has been, I'm looking to take volumes and volumes of information and find the fast paths through that information and not get bogged down all the time with so much information. And so the higher you go, the more you're going to see. I don't want to use earthly language. I don't want to say circumvent the system, but I do want to say that my point of view is Father will show you what you're looking for. And if you're looking for for lack of a better language, a shortcut, he's going to give it to you because you want it.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's yeah, I probably wouldn't use the word shortcut, but I'd probably use it's the same thing. It's greater governmental authority, and therefore it does shortcut the need to know all the doctrine, you know, that's ever been espoused throughout the centuries in detail. I mean, think how bogged down the church has got into arguing over this and that doctrine and that. And then you just wonder, is anyone actually governing and ruling, you know, in the midst of this? Or is everyone just arguing what's the doctrine and then becoming so, like, you know, lack of faith and doubt that it's affecting their whole walk?
Mm-hmm.
And this simplifies it. It makes it profound. It makes it tree of life encounter, not, you know, what's the doctrine? I've got to just do something with this doctrine. It's beautiful. It's so light to the spirit.
Jane, I'm also seeing it as living from eternity is very, very important, because if you don't live there first, you can't go to infinity and you can't go to new earth. Ultimately, everything is in new earth. That's the life you're supposed to live from new earth. But eternity is a step towards new earth.
Yes, that's a great reason. Yes. And where is God? Where is Father? If we're engaging Father in union, where is he?
I was just gonna say that the reason I consciously engage with the eternity is because I want to be really one with Christ and Father and Son and Holy Spirit. And so being intimate is not only being close to one another, experiencing things together. I get to intimately know his governing and be part of it, and also being limitlessness in terms of being confined in our timeline, and also being limitlessness in the earthly bound ways of understanding and also manifesting. So it's really about, for me, being one with the one who wants to be one with me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yes, because when you say really at this point, you've fully embraced complete union. You've been through the wedding supper, and you're aware that now you're in full union with the whole of the Godhead, and this is the realm that was the original realm. So to me, there's just no reason to think that we shouldn't be here.
May I interject here? For me, it's reminded me, as Grace was talking, and you, Jane, and Simone, others, it reminds me of the scripture that I've decreed quite often, is being filled with the fullness of him that fills all in all.
That's good. Yeah, and I think the thing that for me it was when I was asking about it, and I felt, you know, quite a few were rejecting the principle, and just what kept coming to me was he'd put eternity in our hearts, and I was like, well, you've put it in my heart, so why wouldn't it be normal for me to go there, you know? And that's why I struggle to understand why anyone doesn't want to go there, because seems to me it's putting up a barrier to the full expression, understanding of how we can operate. And to say that we're not led there, I don't see that at all. I see everybody is, the invitation is open whenever you want it. You're the one blocking it, not we're not led there yet. I'm not ready. Because you're ready when you're ready. You're ready when you give up the resistance and the fighting, which is why the self-government is the big issue. Because what you've got to understand, the journey is about becoming, about relinquishing self-government. That's always been the journey since the fall. And that's what I see, is if there's no desire to go in eternity, it means that there's an element of self-government still there that needs judgment and needs dealing with. But there's definitely a thing out there that's saying, oh, if you're not, you only go where you're led. And I don't see that at all.
I think as much as we want to experience our, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in eternity, our God wants to live inside of each one of us physically. So if our soul is not engaged in where we are seated in heavenly places and being intimate with him in his abilities and in his governing, in his heart, then he cannot live up fully inside of every one of us physically. One of the reasons he created us is because he wants to live physically. He can taste, see, and all those things physically through every one of us. As the way we begin to see and hear, touch everything, all the senses we are experiencing in the eternity, he's also experiencing everything through us physically. So if we do not engage our soul with him, and that our soul really having him to, how should I say, our soul has to be completely in tune with the realm of the spirit, so that he can live out fully through our physical bodies. Otherwise, we still have our own way, and he doesn't get to live out fully.
Yeah.
I have a question. Jane, is eternity not the was?
There was, yes.
So that is where we were before.
Yeah.
So definitely we have to be there.
Yeah. I still can't get the grips of why people will not embrace it, other than it is just so out of our understanding, and it's been so talked about so little that people are scared to go there. I do see that there is an element that you can rush there too quickly, in the sense that if your spirit is not used to governing big mandates, you don't actually know what you're governing over. But if you've got a very good sense of scriptures and the big principles of Father, and what the big mandates are of life, joy, peace, unity, truth, wisdom, identity is a big one. I rule a lot on fullest identity, fullest scrolls, fullest destiny. When you begin to see the blueprints in terms of those really big terms, you realize then that you can't keep going in for the lower mandates. You can. I mean, there are sometimes I see, like I'll see a mandate. I saw the other day, had a big heart for street trafficking a while back, and it still flares up occasionally when I see the immense statistics out there. So this flared up for me the other day, and then I was like, right, well, how do I govern over this? Where do I go? And before I would have gone in, and because I could see all the ways of dealing with it in the courts and all the smaller accusations and I would have dealt with it that way. But now I went straight to Ancient of Days, and I saw it as it was a real justice issue, and I had to judge on the immense trading on wrong floors. I could see all the multiple trading for all, how it had got to this state of millions being trafficked and it's slaves in our day. And all I did was this simple act in the Ancient of Days in eternity, and it was so good to me because I could then move on and do something else. You know, I didn't have to spend hours putting together a court case, and so your spirit eventually becomes so wanting this. And so just to quickly, for the recording, to run through the different realms in eternity, if you imagine it going up, you get the bench of one at the bottom with the portal, and not the bench of one, the bench of three, or the four, the window with you, and then you move onto the bench of one above that, and you're governing like almost, to me sometimes it comes across like an oil drill spinning down, and I'm like drilling down the principles of heaven into the situation and through the realms. And then you, above that, if you can see another realm, you go through another portal. And there's like all these portals. You've got the Ancient of Days in there. And that's something to be explored when you're really, I would say you've really got to be led and ready for that. It's very profound. But everlasting is really above that, and that's where you see through scriptures there's lots of everlasting qualities, everlasting Father, everlasting life, listed through scriptures. So you know that there's these fundamental qualities that you can release from everlasting, and then there is a realm. There is a realm above that, and then they all links in, then all flows around in a circle to new earth, and starts the cycle again. But I've just realized in my page we didn't put Salem in there, and we're getting more and more confident that Salem is a realm in the was, and I think, yeah, so then you can begin to ask about Salem, and what does it all mean to be without genealogy, and what does that mean? I just got some exciting revelation yesterday on that, so I can see how it all fits in with this, these realms. But anyway, if that's all overwhelming, all you have to do is really just go into eternity and just say, well, where do I need to be? And just begin to get a sense of governing with the mandate, and what it feels like, and what and whether there's any of these questions of self-government going on really that might actually be blocking you residing from there and operating from there, and causing you to go back down to some of the ways you operated before. I remember it was quite a transition period for me, and I think my spirit was fighting it, and I was, I'm not sure about this, and and so the self-government thing had to be dealt with. Okay, well, we'll finish there if unless anyone else has got a closing comment or question. Or
I got a comment to make about self-government.
Do.
Self-government sounds to me like I have created my own law. If I'm not willing to submit to Father's law and find out what his law is, then I'm always operating in self-government.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. And also, it's self-government is also any form of rejecting our fullest identity as gods. And so if we're constantly fighting, say, I'm not worthy of this, how could I possibly operate in this way? That's a form of self-government. It's false humility. Yeah, and so that's where our spirit has to really just grow up and just embrace who we were meant to be, because it's a form of dishonor, really. The more, we kind of couch it in our own spirits, I think, as somehow it's a noble quality, but it isn't. It's the opposite. Any form of not embracing your fullest identity it's not humility. It's false humility.
So could we say that is denying our true self?
Yeah, absolutely. And I see it's at the core of every man. There's not one person who doesn't struggle with it. So we're all in the same boat. But academically, theologically, there's no reason why we have to keep fighting it. I think it was a lot of the poor doctrine and understanding that a lot of us were brought up in church as well. It's all about God. It's not about us. And it was all that going over and over and over again into our brains, I think, that made us. I could feel it for ages and ages, because that was told to me for years, over and over and over and over again, and it took a while for it to get out of my system. But I don't struggle with it now, though.
Yeah, that's the Catholic deliverance for Catholics, as well as others.
I just want to add to that with self-government, because once I had Googled the doing your own self-will, and I actually wanted to find the scripture. I was doing something, I don't remember right now, but when I had put that search in Google with concerns this government, what came up, interestingly, I thought there would be some scriptures coming up, but one of the first things that came up was a link to the Satanic Bible. And it was a verse that they put there on Google, which was in the Satanic Bible, which is actually doing your own will and self-government. And so that was, I mean, when I found that was just crazy. And that's when I realized how important it is to actually get out of that and get out of that mindset. And I guess it may also have to do with the outworking of our DNA as well, where we by default tend to operate in that, is what I feel.
It's really interesting.
Can I just say something which just is crossing my mind? Let me just test it out on you guys. Since we're talking about dimensions and dimensions of eternity and so on, and to have the self-government is apart from God, is trapping yourself into a lower dimensional being. Because to be in an eternity was and is to come is even beyond the fourth dimension. It's higher, at least higher than fourth or more. Because of that, like if you're in a timeline of where we are on a physical sense, we are at the most fourth dimension. Pardon?
Sorry, accidentally pressed a button on my computer. I'll walk away. Carry on.
Oh, okay. So to understand the realm of the spirit, he causes us to really move in a higher frequency, so we would understand in a higher dimension and to be able to flow in the all higher dimensions. So self-governing, even though once my thinking that is something that I want to do, but basically it is deception in a way that trapping one to be in a lower dimensional being. Yeah.
Really good. Yeah.
Jane,
Totally agree.
I know we're trying to close. What would you say? How can we learn to not operate in self-government? What's a good way to not?
Yeah, well, that's. I mean, there's multiple things that we're all on this journey of. We have been going through. That's all the judging in the mobile court, and then the judging of ourselves as a judge. They've all been dealing effectively with self-government and the ego. So we've all been on this journey, and we're probably a lot further on than we realize. Because sometimes you don't really feel like the change has happened. I've noticed this. I keep saying, well, am I any different? You know, and I've still got this problem. I've still got that problem. But I think there is definitely a change going on. Even the fact we're here, you know, is evidence that something has changed. We've got a hunger. We've got a heart to do things differently. We're dealing with massive mandates that we never would have entertained before. Things have changed for us. But in terms of the final piece, I mean, I don't think it's ever, I wouldn't ever say the moment you're residing in eternity, you never have any self-government issues. Because I think it's always the ongoing journey until there's a complete new earth for everyone. But something happened with me in the star house thing when I went above that, and then I saw these stones on the breastplate like illuminated and then translucent, and I could see they were all active. And I think that was when I knew that I'd embraced the, how do you describe it? I embraced the 9 strands of the Godhead. And I was saying in my spirit, I was done with self-government. I'd seen the trading, the consequences of self-government. I didn't want it anymore. And I think that's what, when you ask about how do you fully reside in eternity, that's the process that you will go through for yourself, deciding are you done with self-government. Does that answer it or help, Simone?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Jane, I had a question.
Yeah.
Because I had done this residing in eternity with actually aligning my star houses. So I was wondering, is it possible for other people to reside in eternity without doing what I had done? Can they just go and reside, or do they actually need to do that in order to?
Yeah, I think I never think there's one protocol that everyone has to go through. I mean, the Father's too big for that, and it never works that way. So yeah, there's probably multiple different ways, and it probably even may express itself differently in terms of an encounter. But it might be dealing with the same issue, and there might even be other categories. You know, it might be another name other than self-government, self-ego, and self-works. It might be other things, but it's I think the key is to have some encounter where you got that desire, because again, it must never be done from a should. You know, we should do this. It has to be a desire. You're ready at this point to say, you really want that encounter to say, how do I deal with self-government, and how do I make this a place where I operate from, and see what happens. I mean, I'd love to hear testimonies of, you know, if different things happen to people, because you might actually get some level of understanding of heavens that some of us haven't encountered yet. Because it's all so new as well. So there's very few testimonies out there of what people have gone through. So we really need other testimonies, and be confident that your encounter's valid. Yeah. Would others resonate with that? I think it's...
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't think
it's
put
not
out one
one size
place.
fits all.
Yeah. But I know, Bill, yours was similar, wasn't it? I recall.
I had the experience of going through of entering into eternity through having gone through the valley of the shadow of death, and entering through based upon some pages we had at the time that I used as a testimony.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because with me, my experience was where the Father wanted me to visit perfection, you could say, on a daily basis, the chamber of light, and he required me to do that daily, and I couldn't really understand why, but I knew something was changing in me, and then I was ready to actually go to eternity and see stuff. But initially it was difficult for me to see things in eternity. Like I would see something that looked like some people call it like a jet stream. So I would see stuff, but I couldn't really comprehend what I was seeing. But the more I would go to the realm of perfection, there was some change that was happening in me that he knew. And then I started realizing later on. And that's what really helped me to get to eternity, and then go through the bench of 3 and the bench of 1 and so on. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. That's helpful. Yeah, and I'd love to hear what other people see in eternity, outside of those things. If there's anything else, and yeah, it would be good. Yeah, I mean, just post those on the chat as well if you've got any other sort of encounters that were quite stayed in your mind. Yeah, because there's probably huge depths of things that we still need to get a grasp of. And I'm very conscious that there's a whole period, my spirit will not leave it alone, the fact that there is something about what happened between when Lucifer rebelled, before man was created, that whole period, and why was man put in to the garden east of Eden with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This is really upsetting me. I'm like, this is not right. Why was that there? And I feel that it will reveal some more realms in eternity when we understand these stages of creation. So I know that's like the next journey for me. And I've become a bit consumed now with other governance and what's going on. And I know I've got to grow into this. And it's definitely on my scroll. Well, actually, I think it will be on everyone's scroll when they get to that stage of dealing with the other governance that's basically affecting our lives, and also the coming of the end times, really. So it's huge.
Jane, I'd heard counterfeit governments, you just think of as self-government as one type of government, but I'd heard the term counterfeit governments, and then each counterfeit government has its own counterfeit currency.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, counterfeit governments. I mean, that's resonating. I think there's multiple going on that we, as sons, we have to grow into being able to cope with it on our scroll and not say that it's not for us, because in the end of the day, it affects everyone, and we have to understand those periods of the first few stages of creation. And so now we're in this big dialogue with some around with the sons before Adam, and was Eve overshadowed?
We're still trading on this counterfeit currency.
Yes, and I think we're trading as well on the simplicity of the story of Genesis, that we just thought, it's just as simple as everyone knows, and that's all there is to it. And it's not. It's way more complicated. But as we've said, we're not. We're not that's too deep for us. That's not where I'm at. I've got too many other problems. I've got to sort this out. I've got to sort that out. But it's not. When your spirit man grows so magnificently, you suddenly realize, there's a right you have to the full truth, and that's well in your ability to grasp it. And I think also what happened was there was massive trading on the Book of Enoch and massive dishonor of Enoch. And so a lot of this would have been our inheritance if Enoch had been included in all the other books. And because it wasn't, we were playing catch up. But that actually, we would have just grown up with it. We would have all known what was in Enoch, and we would have been very, comfortable with it. So we're making up for lost time, and it needs someone, I feel, who's really grasped this, who will get to know the Book of Enoch quite well and really boil it down for people and summarize the major themes and the points, and someone who can do that easily. We need somebody like that, and then I think we'll see some of the major stages, and we'll be able to govern over those. Yeah. Because I think it's also linked then in with the Book of Revelation, and we're seeing then about the governing over the fall of Satan, and that will be our final kind of mandate. When we can grow to that point, we'll be able to rule over that. So it's quite magnificent, really. It really is quite magnificent what we can be called to if we embrace our fullest identity. Which is why I felt I needed to do this today, because it's getting rid of some of those stumbling blocks, getting an understanding of the heart of why eternity is important, and thank you everyone, because the recording I think will help a lot. I think a lot of good points came out, and it will help a lot with the stumbling blocks in that. Okay, guys, well, we'll leave it there. Shall we finish the recording?
I'm turning it off.